Welcome back to the Found in Translation Talk Show, the talk show that stacks truth on politics and today's hottest headlines. This is your host, Ray Collazo. For the radio audience, you're listening to WPPMLP 106.5 in Philadelphia, people-powered media. And for my podcast, Ride or Dies, you are listening to the podcast version of our talk show all over the country, all over the world, on iTunes, Radio Public, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and any of your other podcast distribution platform pleasures. Again, this is your host, Ray Collazo. You can continue the conversation on social media at Ray's Podcast, R-A-Y-S Podcast on Twitter, or on IG at Ray's Latino Talk, R-A-Y-S Latino Talk. On this Bochinche episode of Found in Translation, you're going to hear from a great friend and Puerto Rican activist David Galarza, who is a viral sensation in the Puerto Rican social media world for his recent confrontation of the delegate, resident commissioner of the island of Puerto Rico, who is a non-voting member of our congressional delegation, Jennifer Gonzalez, infamously known as Jego, for their honest disagreement about her stance on Trump as a political figure in this administration. David has made noise from San Juan to the Bronx with his activism related to the Puerto Rican community. He's also going to give us some updates about Puerto Rican politics in New York, which is always very interesting. Also, later in the show, in our Stacking 20 segment, I'm going to share with you my thoughts on ¿Qué pasó con Beto? And at the end of the show, we're going to honor a legendary icon of not only media, but in my perspective, the spiritual heart in some respects of Latin America over the last several decades. And again, there's your host, Ray Collazo, on Found in Translation. Before we get to the conversation with David Galarza about his recent confrontation with Puerto Rican resident commissioner Jennifer Gonzalez, I wanted to just share a few quick thoughts about what's going on in Washington. As all of you saw, a divided House of Representatives took a recent step to move the impeachment inquiry into President Trump forward late last week, approving guidelines for the public phase of the probe as a top White House official corroborated earlier accounts that the president pressured Ukraine to investigate a political rival. Well, it's a clown car of White House federal officials from all over this administration that have co-signed, had firsthand accounts, and basically confirmed the trajectory of the initial whistleblowers' concerns about that this president is using your tax dollars and the resources of the federal government writ large to pressure foreign officials to illegally engage, meddle, influence our democratic process. You can't get any much more fundamental. Not only as the founders couched their concerns and what they felt were sort of primary urgent matters that rose to the level of impeachment, but also have very well consequences around if we let this go, then who's to say our elections next year have any legitimacy? Because we're allowing this president and this administration to have full reign on trying to identify resources to influence our democratic process. So this really is gone so beyond. Well, we're just so beyond the normal politics, not only of Democrats, Republicans, conservative, progressives, but really beyond. Really, this is about trying to define: do we continue as a democracy or not? Do you want to be South Africa? Do you want to be Italy in the 30s? Do you want to be something else? Do you want a type of dictatorship or faux democracy you see in other parts of the world that we typically have mocked for decades in this country? And unfortunately, a big chunk of our country is saying that they either don't understand the facts that are right in front of their face, that some of the most honorable public servants in our country have already testified and will continue to testify publicly that they have firsthand accounting of, or very close accounting of this president and his minions' malfeasances. as it relates to damaging our democracy, or you choose to ignore it because you would rather have either a weakened democracy or essentially dictatorship in this format because you like the tone, not the policy. You can't believe in the policy. Nobody believes we should have given a $1.9 trillion tax cut to the ultra wealthy except the ultra wealthy. So you tend to ignore that. You tend to just put that aside because this mentality of wanting to keep a power structure of America more akin to where we were in the 1920s as it related to a high preference and a structure that keeps white males, regardless of their talents, in control of our political process and our governmental process and our military and our police forces. That's the kind, regardless of the things we would lose in that process. That's the kind of America that we're looking for. So you can't tell me it's because you understand the intricacies of a revamped trade deal. I don't think you're looking at the nuances of our energy policies. It ain't that, people. The thing before we get to our interview with David, I wanted to note as part of this process that we'll continue to call the question, right? Because the hypocrisy of, on one hand, saying the House of Representatives is having an illegal process or a behind room process. Well, Republican members of those committees were perfectly allowed to be there and participate as other members of the committee, including asking questions, unlimited amount of questions, unlike these public processes with these short time frames that we see on television often. They choose to ignore that fact. And then the other fact is, like other criminal investigations, you have initial private investigations that are done to collect evidence and see if there's a case to begin with. I mean, that's what grand juries are about. That's what detective work is about. You don't tell the potential defendant what you're doing and what evidence you're collecting, and you don't let the witnesses get to see what the others are saying so they can potentially get their stories straight. So this is pretty basic stuff. And now when the House Democrats bring it to a vote to say, okay, let's make this process public now, and by the way, provide more due process, in this case, to the president, the potential person being indicted, in a congressional sense, in an impeachment sense, than any other impeachment process we ever had. Not one Republican in the House votes to just have a public process, which was the complaint all along as they stormed the skiff room and did all this nonsense. So which one is it, people? The last thing I'll say, so that's really the question to me. So what really are we getting at here? What really, are you saying justice for all is justice for almost everybody, or just justice for y'all? What are we saying? Last thing I want to talk about is the person I've been thinking about a lot in this process is Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman. Alexander Vindman is to me, been an incredible patriot in this process. He's someone in his work with the National Security Council was on the call that triggered this entire set of whistleblower investigations and then subsequent congressional investigations and hearings and in media reports. And Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman courageously, still as a member of this administration, goes and testifies last week to share his honest account, firsthand account of that infamous phone call where President Trump essentially asked for a quid pro quo to basically say the Ukrainian government needs to do a lot of shady things for them to get, including meddling in our election, for them to get very needed arms relief against their primary enemy and really the enemy to the Western democratic world, the Russians. This gentleman gets attacked by the right-wing media, by the President Trump. And first of all, how disgusting. I thought the whole purpose of a lot of this conservative rhetoric was to honor and almost like have this blind loyalty to the military. So he doesn't get that kind of treatment. He actually gets the opposite. Very Kaiser Khan-esque treatment. And what was one of the underlying messages of the attacks? Well, he's an immigrant, right? He's not really one of us. I mean, he's white, I guess, but he's one of these Ukrainians. He probably is more loyal to them. And he's not really one of us, regardless of the service this man has given to our country, getting injured in the line of battle, being a Purple Heart recipient, a decorated military veteran who continues to provide us as a global diplomat to this country. Well, he's not really one of us, right? You can't really trust him because, he's an immigrant. He's from Ukraine. You know that, right? He speaks another language. I'm not exaggerating any of this. This is what they've been saying for the last 2 weeks about this man. So this is where part of the conversation we've been having over the last several years, my friends, because the initial attacks went to, well, not only undocumented immigrants, but more specifically the quote-unquote bad hombres, right? Like, we're going to make sure we really want to pinpoint these people that want to do us harm. Gangbangers and, all these gangbangers and all these rapists and all these drug dealers that are coming across the border. And then it quickly became, well, we're just going to fuck with everybody. Or because, they're all on some level going to do us harm one way or another, regardless if they're here to try to present themselves for a legal process of applying for refugee status for various reasons. And then it quickly became, well, all immigrants. And we've seen the attacks to public charge rules, which the courts are pushing back on, and other TPS holders, which again the courts have subsequently pushed back on. But there's been many instances where the administration is openly not only being antagonistic, but trying to codify essentially the elimination of immigration in this country, unless you're wealthy and white. And so now we get to the biggest extreme of them all as it relates to immigrants. A white man who is a high-level decorated military lieutenant colonel who served our country bravely for decades. And he is a big argument in the tearing down of this man who's simply trying to maintain our democratic norms and maintain the foundation of our country by speaking his truth that he heard firsthand on the call, and he has notes from, is that on some level he cannot be trusted simply because he's an immigrant. You see the slippery slope, my friends. And by the way, I'm not an immigrant, and my people have continue to get trashed. Did you hear Mick Mulvaney's derogatory comments toward the Puerto Rican community? Did you see this young man in Indiana, a Purdue student, this Puerto Rican young man wants to be an astronaut, goes to Purdue University, one of the nation's great engineering institutions, and is denied Mucinex because his Puerto Rican driver's license was deemed foreign and unacceptable to some low-level shift manager at a CVS. Hey, young man could have died from not getting that medication timely. Where will it end? Let's listen to David Galarza, one of our great patriots. He's going to tell us how to get this done. And I'll come back and stack a 20 for Beto O'Rourke. Welcome back to Found in Translation Talk Show. This is your host, Ray Collazo. If you follow the Boricua Twitter, Boricua Facebook, Boricuas on social media, this man that we have here on Found in Translation has become quite a viral sensation. But beyond that, he's a true patriot for the nation of Puerto Rico, and someone that whose leadership has caused a lot of interesting and renewed conversations around the status of Puerto Rico, the status of Puerto Rican leadership, not only on the island, but throughout the diaspora. And once you hear the story, you're going to realize, I've seen that guy, whether it was on Twitter, La Comay, or throughout your social media focus. Puerto Rican activist David Galarza, welcome back to Found in Translation, brother.
Saludos, Rafael. Saludos, everyone.
David, so let's tweak people's memories to see where they saw you the last few days. So why don't you share with us? So recently, the resident commissioner, the non-voting delegate or representative for the the colony of Puerto Rico in U.S. Congress, Jennifer Gonzalez, also known in the streets as Jago, spoke at a charter school. Interesting choice of locations. Recently, to a group of Puerto Rican and Black students in Camden, New Jersey. So, David, why don't you set the stage for the moment and the moment you had to say a few words to resident Commissioner Gonzalez.
Well, sure. Well, first and foremost, thank you, Rafael, for inviting me on. This was an invitation that I got by email from Rutgers University. Apparently, they have some kind of relationship with this charter school. And what really ticked me off initially was the fact that they were inviting the resident commissioner to come to this school and to talk for Hispanic Heritage Month, not just as a speaker, as a guest speaker, but that the topic was what the administration was doing or has done for Puerto Rico post-Maria. And I just found that so outrageous and so disrespectful and disturbing that I was going to try to find my way out there, and indeed I did. I was joined by a friend of mine, Jonathan Soto, who's a good brother who works closely with me here in New York City on a lot of different things. And so we took the trip. It was about an hour and a half down the turnpike. We got there, and to my surprise, as soon as we got to the school and made our way to the space where the event was going to be held, there was a bunch of tables with a lot of young kids, mostly in the junior high school age bracket, and they were in their uniforms. And I was like, this is going to be an interesting fight. This is going to be an interesting way to have a kind of exchange with the resident commissioner. At the time, I didn't know exactly how it was going to play out, but I did make my way to a table close enough to the front of the room so that I could be visible, obviously, and I could hear what she had to say. And I sat down by myself, and my friend sat down on another table, and I had the most lovely conversation with the young people there, Black, Latino, Dominican, Puerto Rican, talking about their future, talking about what was going on in Camden or not going on in Camden, et cetera, and so on. And she was late. She was late by about an hour. When she finally made her way to the event, she went to the front and started talking again all this nonsense about what the administration has allegedly been doing for Puerto Rico. And we know that's far from the truth. If anything, they've been denying our people aid even before Maria, life-saving aid, and by way of funding for medical care, as much as also for the repairs of roofs and housing in Puerto Rico. And so for somebody like that, who also is a member of Latinos for Trump, along with Jose Carillon, who is the head of the junta, the financial control board that's really the government in Puerto Rico, the de facto government in Puerto Rico, for her to be coming up there and just saying all these outright lies, I had to, as soon as she finished her diary, her speech, I had I felt the need, especially after talking to those kids as well, to raise my hand when questions were being asked, and I was given the mic. And I gave her, thank you for being there. And I mentioned, who was in the room and all these beautiful faces, black and brown faces, and faces of, poor young people, because that's Camden. We know Camden is an impoverished community, not unlike a lot of the communities in Puerto Rico. And I said to her, basically, your administration is responsible for closing down hundreds of schools, more than 400 schools in Puerto Rico. And as Latinos for Trump, you should be ashamed of yourself, knowing that the president went to Puerto Rico and threw paper towels at our people while they were dying. Thousands of people, over 3,000 people that we know of, died in Puerto Rico post-Maria because of the ineptness, because of the corruption, because of the racism of this administration. So for somebody to go up there again and lie to our children is the utmost sign of disrespect and disgraceful to the memories of all the people that died in Puerto Rico. And I knew it would be escorted at some point, after I got into that with her. And I also mentioned the opportunity zones. During the uprising in Puerto Rico last summer, a lot of nefarious things are going on behind the scenes, including what's called the opportunity zones that were 98 or more of Puerto Rico, 90% or more of Puerto Rico is basically up for grabs for all the vultures that want to come in and buy our natural resources and buy our lands and buy our homes. And that's being combined with another process out there, rezoning, a planification process that was also going on during the uprising that the community effectively has put a hold on and has been forced to do public hearings on. So all of these things are happening. She been, basically a mouthpiece for Trump, a mouthpiece for the junta. Austerity cuts are being imposed on our workers across the board. Hardworking teachers that have spent their lifetime teaching our children are seeing their pensions halved. And, all these horrible things are happening. And yet she can go up to talk to these children about how great this administration is and moving forward, how great they're going to continue to be. So we had to put an end to that nonsense. And I think the most beautiful thing about that event was seeing the reaction from the young people in the audience. They were hooting and hollering and clapping as I was being escorted outside. And for me, that gave me my validation that something had to be said about that spectacle. And if it wasn't me, somebody has to always be there to question authority. And that's the most beautiful thing about this event as well, that I see it as an exercise in civic participation. If they learn anything that day, those children, it's that it's a must as a citizen of any country, be it Puerto Rico or the United States or anywhere, to question authority. And dissent is the most patriotic thing that you could probably express, especially to elected officials that are doing their populace or their constituents wrong.
Watching the video, and I encourage people, and I'll definitely continue to share links to the various social media platforms that are showing it, but it was interesting because the reaction, so there was a couple reactions. One, like you said, the children and the audience for the most part was with you and understood. I mean, it's pretty obvious to anybody that, especially our young people, who's really for Puerto Ricans and people of color and who's not. And so just for her to state that is highly questionable at the very least. But then the other part was her reaction after you were escorted out, or you left because anticipating getting escorted out. And that basically, and I'm sure you saw it, David, but that her response to you was basically, well, we're powerless. I'm powerless. We're a colony. What else do you want me to do? In so many words. And so I thought that was interesting because when we just saw a bloodless revolution on the island, when we've seen a renewed a revolution in so many ways around activism, both here and on the island, small business development, community organizing. This is our representative on the federal level saying, well, we can't do things, and I have to compromise my values. I compromise my integrity for this president and this administration. So I thought, David, what did you think about her response? Because I thought it was very indicative of the mentality of the colonized, powerless mentality that too often our leaders have bought into.
Listen, we talk about the colonized mentality. We talk about, folks, the battered wife syndrome, so to speak, or, the Stockholm syndrome that some suffer. That's the epitome of that. To think that your oppressor is going to do you right, no matter how many times they beat you, is the ultimate sign of somebody who's just really not living in a real world, in a real society, in real time. How could you continue and then also take the lead in supporting an administration and an individual specifically that's already shown how much he detests you, how much he hates you, how he's let your people die? There's no redemption from that. So to continue to get on your knees and beg, to continue to think that somebody at that level, an administration at that level, that an administration that cares, that with such a reckless disregard for your humanity, would change and do right by you, it's beyond belief. And I think the young children got that, and I think that not just the young children there, but when I was in Puerto Rico during the uprising, the bulk of the people that were out on the street were young people from the university and from the public schools that are being decimated in Puerto Rico. And they get it. They know that they're beginning to connect the dots in terms of, the things that are being done in places like Washington and La Fortaleza are the reasons why we don't have teachers, the reason why our schools are closed down, the reasons why we don't have, why our parents and us have to wait months and months to see a specialist at the hospital. It's the reason why we have, toxic ash in places like Guayama and Salinas. It's the reason why, we have, I think, we have so many beautiful natural resources that are being sold from right under our feet. It's like, it's multiple attacks on so many different levels, and it's to see somebody at that level that should be an advocate for Puerto Rico, because you have no vote, but at least be an advocate. selling out every single day like that and continuing to think that this administration really cares anything about us and that their primordial mission in Washington, D.C. is to try to make Puerto Rico a state when, in fact, we know that's never going to happen. Please resign. Jaco, resign. The same way the battle call was Ricky Renuncia. She should just step aside and let somebody who really has heart, who really has the best interests of Puerto Rico do the job, because she's obviously not doing it.
And you're listening to David Galarza, Puerto Rican activist who became a viral sensation this past week when he respectfully, at a community forum in Camden, New Jersey, confronted Puerto Rican resident commissioner Jennifer Gonzalez for her support of President Trump and her positive spin on this administration's policies toward the island. David, first of all, what has been your reaction to the reaction? Because not only did you get, a strong reaction from the youth and your friends.
The following day on a radio station in Puerto Rico, Radio Isla, she described me as a professional protester, or she invented a word in Spanish, un protectador profesional.
Qué fancy.
I wear that with a badge of honor, and I could add it to my resume, and hopefully they'll give me a couple of dollars on top of my salary. Fine. But you know how the people paid me back in Puerto Rico? It's such a beautiful embrace. I mean, I saw people on Twitter and other places saying, I want to meet this man. I want to invite him over to my house in Naranjito. I have a roasted pig here for him, arroz con gandules, and I want to give him a shot of roncaña, a pitorro, a national beverage. And a friend of mine in Culebra, the same. And I mean, the positives outweighed any negatives that I saw on any social media platform, whether it be El Molusco or La Comay or even David Galarza, which I was surprised also retweeted the video. I never expected it to go this far, Rafael, and it did. Shows the disdain that there is, not just for Jaco, but that continues to be post the uprising of the Boricua summer for the nonsense that's going on in Puerto Rico with the junta, with the administration, with the ongoing mess that we have still politically in Puerto Rico with the governor that's still there and her minions, because Ricky might be gone, but the problem is still there.
No question.
And the people are still out on the streets protesting because right now they want to cut the budget for the University of Puerto Rico and close down campuses. They continue to mess with people's pensions. They continue to talk about eliminating worker protections and labor rights. And the junta is just happily going along, doing what they got to do, while the vultures like John Paulson and company and Tannenbaum and others continue to make mint off our backs and off the backs of Puerto Rican workers and Puerto Rican families. So I would encourage everybody, Rafael, whether you're a Boricua in Philly, whether you're a Boricua in Santurce, whether you're in Kalamazoo or California or lo que sea, because our people are all over the place. If you see any of these people that are causing pain and misery to Puerto Rico, stand up. It's your obligation as a Boricua. It doesn't matter if it's just one person. You can make that difference. And you can make them uncomfortable. We say no justice, no peace in the social justice movement. They should have no peace while our people have no justice. So it's the supermarket or the airport or the hospital shows on the Boricuas are to be respected.
No, and look, we can hurt them in the pocketbook too. These people have businesses and we have to do our research and our diligence because
absolutely,
they're not only helping the billionaires, but as millionaires and wealthy people themselves, they're benefiting directly. And that's the bottom line why they're a part of this whole endeavor in the first place. It's about greed, personal greed over our community, especially the Puerto Ricans that are doing it to us, is especially egregious. Thank you, David Galarza. We're going to hear more of this conversation I had. David started schooling us as well about what's going on in New York politics, which is very interesting, specifically some of the movers and shakers going on, some of the Puerto Rican women that are making moves in New York that he wants to give us some updates on. And you're listening again to Ray Collazo on the Found in Translation Talk Show. Thank you so much for listening to us on either WPPMLP 106.5 FM in the Philadelphia or as a podcast anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world. Thank you so much for listening to Found in Translation, where we stack truth about what's going on out here. We're going to stack a 20 for the, some would say sudden, some would say certainly some would say disappointing. Some would say something we didn't see happening a year ago. The ending of the presidential campaign for former Congressman and Senate Texas Senate candidate, Beto O'Rourke. It's interesting because almost a year to the day that Beto ended his presidential campaign, I was in San Antonio, Texas, late October, early November of 2018, with an incredible group of activists and political leaders. I'm talking about, I was at an event. I organized the event, frankly. Not to pat myself on the back, let's keep it real. With Congressman Joaquin Castro, Congressman Lloyd Doggett, current Democratic primary candidate for U.S. Senate, Cristina Zinzun, a fantastic Latina leader, Michelle Tremillo, some other fantastic people, our incredible host, well-known businessman and lawyer in Texas, Jorge Herrera, Juan Gutierrez, our other great friend, housing activist and friend, just a myriad of great leaders down there. And we were there to publicly endorse Beto O'Rourke for Senate, and saw him win or lose as a future star of the party, a RFK Obama-esque figure. So him stepping out of the race before people like Andrew Yang, Julian Castro, Mayor Pete Buttigieg, just speaks to how, as my grandmother Lydia Collazo would often say, you'd never know. My brother Michael Collazo texted me a little while ago. You know, he loves to get the scoops on the podcast, so he knows when I'm about to tape the shows. And then he texts me his political questions, so he kind of get the inside scoop. So he asked me a very good question. He said, Ray, what happened here? What happened to Beto? And I think the way I broke this down here was actually, I had 4 reasons, and I broke them down to percentages. So let me break this down for y'all. ¿Qué pasó con Beto? I think 60% of it was simply Beto was unorganized, and it turned off the media very quickly, and it turns off the political stakeholders very quickly. And there's lots of examples of this. You know, he didn't, his campaign manager wasn't in place the day he announced, and it took a while to sort of just get some basic functional processes and systems in his campaign, from policy, details, the platforms, to just basic day-to-day organization and relating to donors, relating to media, relating to the political class, just relating to getting his campaign off the ground and being able to create messages to position yourself, right? And so that just turned off a lot of people that just want to see a more serious effort running for president. Now, I would say this, in fairness to Beto, 2 things. One is a lot of these dynamics were in place during a Senate run, which were largely ignored by the mainstream media. And as my activists on the ground will tell you in Texas again and again and again, if Beto had a A- Black Latino field operation, he would have beaten Ted Cruz last year. But those organizational gaps were overlooked by the mainstream media and the Democratic establishment that don't pay much attention to Texas, don't understand Texas particularly well for the most part. And so you see, this is what happens. And also, to be fair to Beto, it's kind of impossible to have expected him to be but so organized, just like to run for president, just 4 months, 3-4 months after running for U.S. Texas Senate for a couple of years. He had 4 months, and like Elizabeth Warren's had like a decade. So he wasn't going to come out the box in the same way that you could expect others. So Beto was kind of in a tough spot. The other 20%, Mayor Pete, man. We saw this in 2007. You know, in 2007, people forget, 12 years ago, former North Carolina senator and former vice presidential nominee, John Edwards, looked like he was going to be a very strong competitor to then the slight, I guess the favorite, but not the overwhelming favorite, at the time, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton in the 2007 race. And John Edwards later on fell apart, but at the time wasn't really running a bad race. But here came along a smoother, more exciting, better looking, blacker version, Senator Obama. So Mayor Pete's polish, he's so good on basic cable, and his apparent just more sense of preparedness just gave that contrast and the contrast that he didn't need at the time when Beto was trying to get himself together. I think 10% of it sounds odd because you can't get taller and whiter than Beto, but I think 10% of it is discrimination. Because, and the conservative media is more open about it, but the white people in the political media, especially white males, and from Trump on down, political figures, they really have an aversion to this white man having a Latino nickname. I mean, they tease him all the time about it. They tease him about it. They joke about it. They make snide remarks about it. And I think beyond the nickname, a candidate, regardless if he's Latino or not, or white or whatever, a candidate being from this kind of foreign-feeling place, American place, El Paso, Texas, which speaks to regional bias in our media, but also just speaks to, bias against these non-traditional white communities in our bases of population in our country. In a sports analogy, San Antonio is not a small market. Albuquerque, New Mexico is not a small market. Tucson, Arizona is not a small market. They're just small white markets. El Paso, Texas, big city. There's not a lot of white people there. Or traditionally have not been a lot of white people there. So this is some of the bias. Some of that bias, even though, again, Beto's very white, definitely hurt him. And I'd say the last 10% of it, which could have been some of the last nail in the coffin. And again, once he talked about taking guns from people, that was a wrap for a lot of folks. And a lot of the viability argument that many have thought he had, with all due respect, white gun owners feel about their guns the way a lot of white people feel about their dogs and pets. It's the third rail in their life. You start talking about messing with that stuff, it's a wrap. But I'll say this about Beto, he I've come away the last couple years with this Beto experience, coming away really admiring the guy. I think he's a good guy. I think he's genuine. And I think he brings a lot to the table. And I think he'll do a lot for our movement. There are just so few people in the national scene, particularly non-Latinos, that can speak about immigration issues in any intelligent way. I mean, frankly, most of the national Democratic leadership are not connected to it in any real way because of where they're from in the country or their personal background. They speak about it in very ideological terms, or they speak about it like they're reading talking points. And there isn't really a lot of either depth of knowledge or really a boldness to tell the truth, which is, it is about a bunch of nonsense. If a Latino stays in Mexico, as Ray Suarez once shared with me, I want to share this with you. If a Mexican stays in Mexico working, well, because of these crappy trade deals, you're screwing us over. And once they try to come into work, they're a threat to our jobs here. This is all nonsense. Where would our economy be without the immigrants, regardless of their immigration status in the ag industry and in the service industry, and immigrant small business owners revitalizing inner cities or our small towns, or immigrants who are running Silicon Valley and is one of the major economic engines that, regardless of if Obama's in or Trump is in, that's what's building the economy. It's not anything. It's not a $1.9 million tax cut for the rich. It's not that. It's not because we have a businessman running the office. Guy's the worst businessman I've ever seen. Guy can't manage anything. Can't manage himself out of a paper bag. So it's not another thing. So Beto, stay in the fight, brother. Look forward to having you on the show soon. Let's listen to the rest of our conversation with David Galarza. He's going to break down a little bit about New York politics for us. And I'll come back to talk about the loss of a great icon and spiritual leader in our community. here on Found in Translation. David, I wanted to, before I let you go, I'd be remiss not talking about New York politics. This is this question around standing up for truth and justice and supporting our grassroots emerging leadership, which is overwhelmingly female and young, is going to come to the fore in a few federal races in New York. We have AOC, of course, the indomitable AOC, who's recently heard, it's been announced that she's going to have a primary challenge, a former elected official in New York, Fernando Cabrera. And we have well, even though it's Puerto Ricans, un mangú, un asopao, and the sancocho in the Bronx Bronx federal congressional race, outgoing retiring Congressman Jose Serrano has his retirement has opened up a slew of candidates going for that seat that are on all ends of the political spectrum in Democratic politics. So catch us up briefly, David. Why are these two races in the Bronx and in New York City so important for the future of the Puerto Rican community and in this conversation we're having around how we develop our leadership on the island and in the states?
Well, they're important because first and foremost, they're voting positions, and they're very representative of probably one of the largest communities of Puerto Ricans outside of Puerto Rico. So in effect, you become a de facto public servant or elected official for Puerto Rico, or sort of like a shadow representative, much like the role that Luis Gutierrez filled when he was the elected official. Well, let me say that he perhaps, in my opinion, killed it best in terms of really fighting for Puerto Rico, because you also have Nidia Velázquez and Jose Huzar, like you said, who's outgoing, who did some work, but for me, Luis Gutierrez always personified really the fighter in Congress that Puerto Rico deserves. So there are two races. Obviously AOC running for re-election. I don't see any of the people that are running there now really forming really giving her a race, so to speak. Especially Fernando Cabrera. He's more of the ilk of Ruben Diaz Sr., the homophobe, the really offensive, really right-wing so-called Democrat who's in the city council now. I just the way AOC is moving and the way that she's campaigning, the way the constituents in her district and beyond love her and represent her and to support her. I can't fathom anything but the best in terms of people coming out for AOC. In terms of the other race for Serrano, there are a bunch of politicians. And then there's one young lady who's an activist in the mold of AOC. Matter of fact, she actually worked with AOC's campaign when most people dismissed her. When labor unions dismissed her, when people that are running for that seat, including Melissa Margarito and Blake and others, dismissed her as a potential or as a viable candidate in the race against Crowley. They're running, but Samalís is a community activist. She's Dominican and Puerto Rican. She's got the backing of a lot of the progressives that back AOC in the Bronx and in Queens and other areas. And she's doing her due diligence, knocking on the doors and trying to connect with as many of the disenfranchised people in her district to get them to come out and vote for her and give their donations, because it's going to be a people-powered campaign, much like AOC is not taking any corporate contributions or money, unlike a lot of the other candidates that are already in the race and are taking corporate donations and donations from institutions and corporations and so forth. So my support is for Samalís Lopez, and I would encourage everybody that is in the city or who has family in the city to support her as well. This is a very important district for us because it's historically a very large Puerto Rican community in the South Bronx. It's going through its changes right now in terms of gentrification and pressures for housing and other things. And we need somebody who's really committed to progressive, truly, because I know that word is bandied out everywhere, progressive, but somebody who's going to be truly progressive in terms of doing the due diligence for poor people, for working people, and for the people that have been living in the South Bronx through the fires and are now struggling to stay there with the pressures from gentrification and the different developers that see gold in the South Bronx now when everybody else didn't really care too much about it. So my vote is for Samalís. I was in that district. I love Brooklyn, but I'm going to be supporting it to the hilt. And AOC is going to have great company, her and the squad, if Samalís gets in there. And that's what we need to focus on, fortifying the squad. It can't just be these four young ladies fighting the administration and fighting reactionary forces both within the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. We need to fortify and increase that squad as much as possible in the next term and the term after that, and have a really progressive movement in Congress.
That's right, and I want to shout out our great mutual friend Charlie Ramos, who is doing a lot of work, not only supporting, I know AOC certainly, but also Jessica Cisneros, who's a young, dynamic Mexican-American immigration lawyer in South Texas, who's taking on the most conservative Hispanic Democrat in Congress, Henry Cuellar Jr., who's got to go, who's been a thorn in our side for many years. So this is about justice, supporting the next generation of leadership. And this is a great lesson, especially for you youngins out there and people that are frustrated and are looking to make a splash on social media, is that, it's one thing to take nice pictures, but the reason that David wasn't looking for viral stardom, he was doing what was in his heart, what he felt was right, and he was speaking truth to power in a way that was compelling, and has gotten this attention. So it's not about sort of a social media strategy. It's about doing the right thing, putting in the work, and doing, and stepping out of our collective comfort zones to represent for the community. Because at the end of the day, David's going to be okay. I'm going to be okay. But there's so many people, especially those young people in the campo in Puerto Rico and in our inner cities. So it's very appropriate that David helps us draw that connection today between the young people in Camden, the young people in Aguabo, and across the diaspora. David Galarza, let people know where they can follow your activism on social media and anything else you'd like to share with our talk show audience.
Yeah, sure. I post a lot on a group page on Facebook called The Call to Action on Puerto Rico, so please join that page. We also have another page called Siempre Presente, but or just looking up on Facebook as well, David Galarza Santa, and yeah, just keep on getting involved wherever you may be in Philly or New York City or wherever you may find yourself. Just get involved with different organizations that are doing the good work. Connect with those organizations on the ground in Puerto Rico that, as we speak, are building the motherland, are rebuilding the motherland from the ground up. Comedores Sociales, Casa Pueblo de Adjuntas, Agitarte, are just some of the ones that I've been working with these past few years. Dynamic organizations that, especially during this time of year, could use your financial support. Look them up on social media. Give. Ask people to give to them instead of give you some kind of material gift for the holidays, because the work they're doing is so essential. Comedores Sociales, for instance, feeds hundreds of people every day at the university. A lot of poor kids that are going to school and are sometimes going without meals because they have to decide whether to pay for a class or pay for some books or pay for some rice and beans. And so they've been doing this work even before Maria, and they do it in a way, in the style of the Black Panthers and the Young Lords Party. They don't just give you food, but they also give you knowledge about why it is that you don't have food, why it is that tuition is going up, why it is they're closing these campuses down. So it's a social justice ministry, so to speak. And it's important for us to support all these different efforts in Puerto Rico the same way that we have to support them here as well. So if you have a couple of dollars to give, please give to these organizations and encourage others to do the same. That's
right. The movement does start. Dave Galarza, I appreciate you, brother, as always. Congratulations for being the social media sensation. And anyone that makes a Comay appearance, it's definitely a bucket list issue. Que Bochinche, Baba. Thank you, brother. Appreciate it. Keep up the good work, my friend. Thank you, David Galarza. You're going to keep hearing David, and we're going to keep talking about issues impacting the island of Puerto Rico, the Puerto Rican nation, not only on the island, but throughout the diaspora. And David's a big part of those conversations. Again, thank you so much for David, for you being on the show, brother. Always appreciate you. We got to give it up and have a few moments to share about the legacy, of one of the icons of Latin America, of the Latino community, of the Spanish-speaking world. The recent passing of legendary Puerto Rican astrologer and media personality, Walter Mercado. Walter was an incredible icon on so many levels. And I mean, look, well, I'll just start with this. Besides, we'll get into the obvious stuff later. But for my money, one of the most influential, and I'm not saying this flippantly, I'm not saying this to be provocative. I think one of the most influential spiritual leaders in our community over the last several decades. I mean, this is someone that was in our televisions, in our lives, in our media, preaching peace, preaching the power of love, preaching tolerance, preaching a certain type of spirituality that was very sort of pro-romance, if that makes sense. Like, it's okay to want to be loved. It's okay to pursue relationships. It's okay to get your groove on some level, right? Like, that doesn't go against, any sort, like within his astrology, a lot of it's kooky and a lot of it's, it's not form of religion. And, on some level, it's like wrestling. You can only take it so seriously. But Walter had that effect on us. I mean, his tagline, con mucho, mucho, mucho amor. What a legacy this man left for us. To leave it with this overwhelming sense that we should be drowning in love. What a great legacy, this man. And did it in an entertaining style, an outlandish style, flamboyant. I would say flamboyant. One of the underlying legacies of Walter, of course, was that, he's always been, even though I don't think he ever formally discussed much or formally, quote unquote, came out, but, an icon for, the LGBT community, an icon for just being an unabashed person of who he is and living his truth and his clothing, his style, his dramatic flavor, and just being unapologetically Walter. And just, he did so much, entertained so much. He was entertaining. The guy was entertaining, dramatic. He was just great television, great media personality, did a lot, by all rights, a good man that did a lot that just treated everyone, was very warm and open to everyone. So rest in peace, Walter Mercado. This obviously is a particular tough one for the Puerto Rican community, even though the Spanish-speaking world, and really all over the world, people know who he was. But I mean, Walter's one of our great icons, and I think outside of the singers and the political figures, I mean, Walter's got to be right up there, frankly, as one of our all-time biggest celebrities. Walter Mercado, Descansa en Paz. You are with the, someone said on social media today, you didn't die, you just joined your fellow stars. And those stars really guided you in your incredible message to our community and our world over decades of service. So rest in peace, Walter Mercado. And thank you so much, Mercado. And thank you so much for listening to this episode of Found in Translation. Again, thank you for joining us on WPPMLP 106.5 FM in Philadelphia. Our podcast, of course, which you can hear all over the country, all over the world, on iTunes, Stitcher, anywhere you can find the Ray's Latino Talk podcast feed, soon to be rebranded as Found in Translation. Continue the conversation with me, your host, Ray Collazo, on Twitter at Ray's Podcast, on IG at Ray's Latino Talk. Email me. You can always email me. We keep it going 24/7, 365, podcastrays@gmail.com, podcastrays@gmail.com. We just came back from Rowan University. We're going to be doing a lot more live events. So if you have a college, you have a group that you'd like me to come speak at or kick it or just want to be part of the podcast, feel free to reach out to me at podcastrays@gmail.com. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful week. You never know where I'm going to pop up next. We'll be doing a show at the end of the week here, so definitely look out for us being back in studio on Thursday night. And again, follow me on social media. You never know where I'll be this week, working with our great leadership around the country to try to keep stacking that truth. Have a wonderful week.